Everybody say welcome back. Oh, like 3 people. Everyone say welcome back. Welcome back. It's good to be welcome back, and I feel right at home and amongst all my friends here today. Thank you to all of those that came up and said hello to me at halftime. That was fantastic, and great to know that I've actually met some friends of our family here. Where's Kerry? She saw her down there, somewhere down there. A very good friend of our family was actually here, so nice to know that I'm amongst nice friends as well. Just a couple of housekeeping things while I remember. In your packs that you've got, everyone here gets a certificate of attendance today. That's already in there, so if you haven't seen that, that's in your pack. But if you do need a CME credit certificate, we can order those for you. If you put your name down at the registration desk, there's a little form that you can fill out there to get one of these to get your accredited things that you do, you wonderful CME people. So go and get those, claim them, because they're all there to be claimed. Also, if you haven't already clicked on, we do have free Wi-Fi today, so all you've got to do is join the Pullman Wi-Fi network, and the password is NZRC16. And if you forget that, it's in your booklet, so you can have a look in there and find all the details about joining up on the Wi-Fi there, so you can do all your hashtag NZRC stuff today. I heard someone say they'd been posting on Twitter this morning, so I'm going to go and check that out very shortly. And also, what else are we going to do here? Well, it's a lovely moment for us today. As we all know, our focus is children and young people, and right now we're going to explore something I'm quite excited about. We're going to look at the new child asthma guidelines, and to help us do that today in this plenary, we have a fantastic guest here to help us, and this is Professor Ines Asher, and she is the Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Auckland, Department of Pediatrics, and Child and Youth Health, and respiratory pediatrician. She's a respiratory pediatrician at Starship Children's Health. She has been the chair of a worldwide research study for more than 20 years, and that's the International Study of Asthma and Allergies in Childhood. She is an expert in this stuff, and now the Global Asthma Network. She is on the steering group of the National Child and Youth Epidemiology Service. She is also on the management committee of the Child Poverty Action Group and actively promotes policies to lift children out of poverty. In 2003, Professor Asher was awarded the Officer of New Zealand Order of Merit for Services to Pediatrics, and in 2007, the Health Research Council Liley Medal for her research leadership. She is an absolute gem to our country, a very, very special person, and she knows a lot about this, that we're going to talk about right now. So please give a warm welcome to Professor Ines.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Kia koutou te mana o tēnei whenua. Tēnā koutou katoa. I tau mai ana tātou ki runga e te karanga o tēnei rā. He mate hoangau, he kaupapa nui tēnei ki a tātou katoa. Nō reira, he honore nui tēnei ka tuahau, I mua ia koutou I tēnei wahi, I tēnei wā. Thank you very much, Chris, for your kind introduction, and greetings to the Indigenous people of this area, and I feel very honoured to be speaking on this important topic of asthma in children. And just my credentials there in terms of who I belong to. I belong to this foundation as well. So I'm a member of the newly formed scientific advisory group of the Asthma and Respiratory Foundation, which met for the first time yesterday. So I have to get a logo to go up on that slide. Now, the other thing I wanted to say is on the 4th of October, I tripped while I was jogging with some friends, and I fell on my head and hit my head really hard, and I'm suffering from concussion. And I've been largely off work since that time, and my concussion service advised me to have a half an hour sleep in the morning, have an hour and a half sleep after lunch, and have half an hour sleep before dinner. As one of my friends said, that sounds like a perfect recipe for all of us. But I have missed my morning sleep, and if my brain's not as sharp as I would like it to be, please be tolerant. And I've tried to make this talk relatively straightforward to help me, and helpfully convey anyway some good messages. So the Asthma and Respiratory Foundation asked me to chair a group to create the child asthma guidelines, and we're now calling them the child and adolescent asthma guidelines. And these 13 people we've got together and we've co-written these guidelines, and they're being tweaked at the moment. We had hoped to have them out by now for consultation, but that's probably about 2 weeks away, and I think my concussions had a bit to do with that delay. So we're quite excited about trying to make these not just another guideline and looking very like the British ones or some other country. We have made them completely up to date by referring to other major documents, including the adult one you'll hear about tomorrow from Professor Richard Beasley, which I think is in the process of being published. We'll be behind that, unfortunately, but we want to get it right. So the spotlights of these guidelines are going to be aiming for equity. So we know about a huge amount about inequities in this country, and we're trying to come up with approaches that will aim to lessen inequities, aim for equity. The sections that I'm wanting to focus on today are these 5 sections: preschool wheeze, diagnosis and treatment, getting it right for adolescents with asthma, getting it right for Māori children with asthma, and getting it right for Pacifica children with asthma. And we'll hear a lot more about the adolescents this afternoon from Terry and Rochelle. So what is equity? This diagram, this cartoon, shows very clearly the difference between equality, where everyone gets an equal amount, and equity, which gives an extra leg up to people who need an extra leg up to reach the same goal. And that's what we mean by equity. So in New Zealand at the moment, our approach to equality is leading to outcomes in terms of what kids can see in this cartoon, should we say, and giving equal opportunities for equal outcomes. And this is a very important difference to understand. So we want, these guidelines will be a supportive part of trying to get all New Zealand children to have the right to achieve outcomes equal to those children living in the least deprived decile, i.e. the most well-off socioeconomically. Everybody in New Zealand should be able to achieve those outcomes. That's what we believe, and that's what we should be aiming for. We've, I guess, spent the last decade defining these inequities, or decade or longer, defining these inequities and saying what's contributing to them, and we're trying now to go that step and to come up with approaches that will help. And I must say that the Asthma and Respiratory Foundation has been great leaders in this way. So this is really, what I'm talking here is really the Foundation's approach, which I totally congratulate them on and support. So they commissioned this report, The Impact of Respiratory Disease in New Zealand 2014 update, published in 2015. And if you haven't looked at it, please do. And it's got great illustrations, and I'm going to show you a couple now. So we can look at inequities for asthma outcomes in a range of ways, but I'm just going to take you through a few. Now, these aren't about children, these are about the whole population, but they're illustrative. But what you will see here, so this is about asthma hospitalizations by age group, males, females, total. And what you'll see here is the under 15s are far and away the most hospitalised for asthma. So there's a huge inequity by age. So that's why the child and adolescent guidelines are so important, and we have to be doing better. I am feeling a bit wonky, I have to say, so if I'm just stumbling a bit, you just have to be tolerant. So this is the next one, which is inequities by ethnicity. And you'll see the huge inequities here, which we know about, of course. And I just would say now, when we're looking at these, if the x-axis labels were changed so that non-Māori Pacific Asian were the same rates as Pacifica or Māori, would this country be doing more? And the answer, of course, is yes. And if that's the case, what we're trying to do with reducing inequities is to do what we might do, in fact, if another groups other than Māori and Pacifica had these rates. Could anyone possibly get me a high stool? I'm much better sitting down. A high stool, not a chair, but a high stool. I'm happy to stand while I deliver. Perhaps I could just sit down, shall I? Yes. Okay, I'll just sit down, yeah. Okay. Okay. A proper chair, that'd be good. Yeah, proper chair, thanks, yeah. Okay, thank you. Now this label is wrong at the top. It should be by deprivation. And here we look at the hospitalizations. This again is all ages by deprivation index. That's the level of socioeconomic deprivation in neighbourhoods in New Zealand. And what's that?
I'm just going to sit here if you need to fall over.
Oh, that's great. No, I won't fall over, but I'm just struggling a little bit. I'm sorry because I haven't had enough rest this morning. So you'll see here the huge inequities. And again, if NZ DEP 1 and 2, which is where I live in Devonport, had this, if this was reversed, would we be doing more? And why can't we do more? That's our challenge. And here we have, this is again all ages, inequities for asthma, deaths by ethnicity. It's quite similar to hospitalizations. These patterns we're very, very familiar with, and we're actually quite sick of them. We need to come along to a conference in 5 years' time and see them different. And of course, that's not going to depend just on everyone in this room, but others as well. Now, the three major documents around reducing inequities that the Asthma Foundation published in 2015, and this is another one that was led by Bernadette Jones and Tristram. Māori Health Literacy. It's quite a lengthy document, but it's got some really good points in it, and above all, it's highlighted to us our deficiencies in this area and how we want to, strategies to improve it. So I do commend this, if you're involved with asthma health literacy, which I presume everybody in this room is in some way, please read it, and you'll get something out of it for yourself. We're all not very good at, well, I speak for myself in this area. We've got a lot to learn. And this is a major way to improve and lessen inequities. The other document that the Asthma Foundation produced in 2015, which was splendid, and this was Kathy Liss who wrote this really with everyone's input, but it was fantastic. It's the National Respiratory Strategy. And this tells us what to do to reduce inequities or to eliminate them. It's quite comprehensive, and I do commend you also to read this if you haven't already. It's a very, very good document. So coming back to the guidelines, there are 6 sections in the guidelines, and I'm not going to take you through much of it because it'd be silly for me to stand up here and take you through a very, lots and lots of words. I'm just going to talk about some principles. So we have an introduction, a section on diagnosis, a section on assessing asthma severity control and future risks, and I won't be talking too much about that. Management approaches, I'm going to talk a bit about that. Medicines, stepwise approach to long-term management and also acute severe management. I won't be talking much about that. And I just reassure you that only 26 references. So in fact, it could be fewer, but we've deliberately put in, we're just referring to those major documents like the adult guideline and GINA. You can go and look there for all the evidence, levels of evidence. We're just putting references pertinent to New Zealand in addition, so things that weren't in those. So we're trying to make this a manageable document, and we're still refining it. And I must say, the process of preparing this talk today, I'm just thinking of ways of even simplifying the guidelines further. So by the time you see them and they go out for consultation, yes, we want you all and all your bodies that you belong to look at them, please, and give us feedback, not only on the content, but the setting out. And we've got 7 figures and 7 tables. Again, we want things to be easy to see at a glance. One of the, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but we've put in top 10 ways health professionals can help the child with asthma, child adolescent with asthma, apart from prescribing medicines. And this is, here are 10, and the first one, relationships, is about relationships with the health professional, and what comes out is continuity is important. And that's one of these things that's tended to have fallen away with a lot of changes in our health systems. Having an approach to families to aim for wellness, not accepting sickness. Continue to strive for reduction in smoke exposure. Ask about unhealthy housing. Ask about income. I'm just going to pause there for a second. I don't know if any of you saw the press release, media release by Child Poverty Action Group on Monday about access to the Child Disability Allowance. And I want to just remind you that, and it will be referenced specifically in this document, that children with poorly controlled asthma, and I'm talking about children equals, by definition, 0 to 18, under 17, 0 to 17, is children with partly controlled or poorly controlled asthma should have the Child Disability Allowance, which is $46 a week. Now, if you go to the guideline, it'll be referenced in the guidelines, the actual link. It actually gives you an example, as a specific example about medical conditions for which you can get the Child Disability Allowance. And there's one on asthma, and there's also one on eczema. Very, very helpful. And we're I'm trying to think of, not letting people get access to this, and they should. So I'm really wanting you to strengthen, and that's topical because the Child Poverty Action Group did a report about access to the CDA Child Disability Allowance in Otara, and it was launched on Monday, and there was a whole editorial in the Herald on it. The entire editorial was on our piece of work. So we know a lot of people are struggling with poverty. Health literacy I've already mentioned, and it comes up through in the document. Adherence, which is really important, and Terry and Rochelle talked about that this afternoon. Action plans, make sure people have got one in education. They know how to access healthcare, and very importantly, we do get occasional deaths from asthma in children, and sometimes the ambulance has just been called too late. People must know how to call an ambulance. We must avoid deaths in children, and adults, of course. So these are just some barn door things that really are, you can't make headway on asthma that's not well controlled unless you're looking at all those things. So wheezy children, which we call preschool in New Zealand. Now, you'll notice it goes to 1, and we're going to yet have to add something into the guidelines about 0 to 1, but our guidelines about 1 to 15 years. So preschool children, some general notes. About half of them who wheeze don't have asthma at school age and later. That's important. So not all the wheezy kids have asthma, what we call it asthma, but half of them do. We manage them according to 3 patterns of symptoms and labelled accordingly to assist decision-making about prescribing inhaled corticosteroids. I'm going to come back to that. This is very important part of the new part of our guideline. And in all wheezy children, bronchodilator could be prescribed as if for asthma according to clinical severity. Either you can have one dose here, or you could have increasing doses. Now, one of the things there's been a whole lot of change of terminology about preschool wheeze, and what we felt was, and one of the things that's happened is almost some people are saying you can't diagnose asthma until the age of 5, and yet people are giving inhaled steroids. So we wrestled with this, and we decided to give a label of asthma under 5, but we're going to call it preschool asthma. I'll come to that in a minute. Anyway, it'll become clear as I go through. Okay, so we've got 3 patterns here. The infrequent preschool wheeze, we're calling it, and it's also known and talked about in overseas documents and locally as so it's meant to be infrequent, sorry, that was a mistake in it's also called infrequent viral or episodic wheeze. It's a mistake when I copy didn't change it. The next one is frequent preschool wheeze. It's also called frequent viral or episodic wheeze, and I'll come back to more on these definitions. And then finally, this new term that we've coined called preschool asthma. Now, this is a new step in our guideline because we have a lot of people not getting treated when they might have asthma under 5, not getting preventer when they should, and because they're not being labelled as asthma, or parents thinking, oh, they don't have asthma at all, and it's very confusing. How can you deliver asthma care to preschoolers who do have asthma if you're not calling it asthma? So we've created that category. This is a controversial addition to our guideline, or tack we've taken, and we think it makes perfect sense and doesn't undermine our current approaches. So here I got it right. These are those with infrequent symptoms of wheeze only with viral illnesses. Inhaled corticosteroids are not indicated. So we use bronchodilator PRN. Frequent preschool wheeze, those with frequent episodes of wheeze more than every 6 to 8 weeks only with viral illness but no symptoms in the interval between. You can give those children a trial of inhaled corticosteroids for 6 to 8 weeks. If there's a positive response to that, we're going to then label them as preschool asthma. And if there's no response, they remain labelled as frequent preschool wheeze and get treated only with bronchodilator according to severity. Now here's the one that we're calling preschool asthma. Now preschool asthma, remember, for those of you who've gone onto the new lingo that Europeans have put out, which is multi-trigger wheeze, but these are the kids who need to have inhaled corticosteroid or Montelukast. So we want to call them, give them an asthma label, because we need to treat them as if they're asthma, even though we're not sure they're going to be asthma long term. Right now, when they're 3 or 4, we need to treat them as if they're asthma and give them asthma education and asthma preventer. But we also can tell the family when they go off to school, this might all change. And they may not have asthma, but for now we have to treat them as asthma. So that's why we're giving it this term. And this is a new step, and I haven't tested it out on anyone until today, apart from the group itself. So interested in your thoughts. And the whole issue is people don't like calling preschoolers asthma if they haven't really got it and are going to grow out of it for insurance purposes and future work, employment, and so on. This is a way around that, we thought. Okay, oops. So here we go, back to our preschool. It could be one of these kids. And I don't want you to read this, but this 4 steps approach to this 1 to 4 years. And I'm just going to focus on step 2, which is the most common one many of us are involved with, and this is the uncontroversial recommendation. So you'll actually find all of our medicine guidelines really are just taken from other people's guidelines. They're uncontroversial. We've tailored them to what's available in New Zealand, and that's the approach we've got. For the 5 to 15 years, we've got a 5-step approach, and these are the 2 steps you might most commonly be interacting with. And again, there's nothing terribly new about these. This is actually, we're not coming out with it. There are no new asthma drugs for most people with asthma. There are no new ways of doing that. They haven't been around for the last 5 years or so. So we're just coming out with the standard recommendations that are highly referenced and evidence-based. This is, again, completely nothing new, just inhaler devices by age, just reminding us that for people who don't know, that we do focus on using the MDI with a spacer as a prime approach in children. So the thrust of the GINA guidelines, and which we like, is and this is their latest guideline, 2016, is looking at asthma control. I mean, there's been a lot of other groups as well, but coming to looking at asthma control rather than labelling it the type of asthma. I put this as one long diagram, I put it into 2 bits, and you can just read it for yourself. I'll give you a minute. I can pause and you can read it. So that's pretty simple. And what I'm saying, going back to the child disability allowance, based on partly controlled and uncontrolled, if this is an ongoing thing, despite your best efforts and the family's best efforts, they should be considered for child disability allowance. So getting it right for adolescents with asthma, we're both in the emergency department and interval care. I'm just going to hand that one straight over to Terry and Rochelle Moss, who are talking this afternoon. There's also the workshop this afternoon, so I'm going to say nothing further, except it's very important, and we're including it in this. And Terry, as you know, is a co-author on these guidelines. So we've got a couple of other sections which are important, and we're calling it getting it right for, so getting it right for adolescents, getting it right for Māori children with asthma. And our goal is that Māori children have asthma outcomes equal to non-Māori and non-Pacifica children. And the recommendations we've got here, and we're keen to have actually your feedback on the wording of these and getting these right, is around audit in your own practice, a health literacy approach, which is well documented in that, as I've mentioned. You've got Susan Reid, I think, talking later as well. Cultural competency and Māori leadership in your area, delivering. So those are some key points. Getting it right for Pacifica children with asthma. To have Pacifica children have asthma outcomes equal to non-Pacifica, non-Māori children. And we're recommending audit of your practice. Looking at the material needs for Pacifica. Pacifica are the most, by statistics, the data shows that they are the most materially disadvantaged, i.e. more proportionally, greater proportion of severe hardship. We need to really assess these in your own practice and have pathways if you find someone really at need as to how you might take a step to help them. I know that's difficulty with complex things like housing, but we've got to start somewhere. And interpreters are important for Pacifica. So we've got a whānau family approach to this, and I just got these off the web this morning, probably why I'm tired, doing my preparation. And I just thought these are 5 different ethnic groups and families, and you'll see the 3 generations. It's just interesting to note, isn't it, that the kids are in the centre and being nurtured. All these photographs, just random ones off the internet, I said, Māori family, European family. The kids are always in the centre and being held by the whānau and family. And so they are the centre of the family's universal, they should be. They are valued, they're nurtured and supported. And I guess these guidelines have that theme in them as well. So that's all I want to say, and finish with this young person who's saying, yeah, we can go do it. Let's do it. Thank you. Stay here, Terry. It's been good to have you here, so stay here. It's good to have you here. Thanks. Yeah.
I think, considering the circumstances, I think Professor Innes probably deserves another clap for powering through. And also a thank you to our friend here, our guardian. Isn't that nice? That's humanity right there in action.
Fabulous.
That's very special, so we just want to acknowledge that. Well, I just wondered whether or not, we don't want to take up too much Professor Innes' time. We wanted to go off and have a rest. But if it's okay to make space for 2 questions from the
That's
floor.
fine. I will say I'm sorry. I've just come in for my talk and I'm going. I won't be here for the rest of the conference. So happy to have a couple of questions. And also, if anyone wants to follow up by an email, that's fine. Thank you.
That's a good idea.
And you'll get the draft anyway, and that's a great opportunity. If everyone here can get the draft to see as well, I'm talking to Teresa, wherever you are, that would be great. Yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. So if you've got a question, please raise your hand right up in the air. This is good practice for any other times we have question and answer, so we can see our mic runners need to see where you are. We have a question over here. Just tell us your name and where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Rachel Hall from Wales South in Southland. I just noticed on one of your slides, and it was about the inhaler devices, and it was about the MDI, and it said that people over the age of 15, it's possible for them not to use a spacer.
Yeah, look, well, that's really a pragmatic approach to older adolescents, and it's really just for a SABA use, the short-acting beta agonist. Yeah. We always recommend that inhaled corticosteroids are given with a spacer.
Not so much the short-acting.
What's that?
Not so much the reliever inhalers then. Because, well, it just said possible, and I just wondered if it's written there possible, it kind of makes it look like they don't really need a spacer.
Would you mind feeding back to me on the document when it comes around on that?
Yeah.
And I don't want to get bogged down on that detail, but the point well taken is not very well expressed, and we need to do. That's actually, I have to say, I cut and paste that figure from the 2005 paediatric guideline and put it straight in. So I welcome qualifying comments or any suggestions when it comes around. Thank you. Yep. Good point.
Thank you for that. One more question if there's anyone out there. Looking. Yes, over here. We've got a mic runner. Thank you, mic runner. Great job. Just give us your name and where you're from.
I'm Lupe from Palmerston North. I just find it so disheartening, the specific, stats and, things that have been shown. But nevertheless, if there's a job for me in Auckland, I'm quite keen to take up a nursing job in Auckland. So I put it out there. Thank you.
Hey! Fortune favours the brave. Thank you. That's great. Taking new territory. I like that. Fantastic. Well, that's probably all we have time for right now. We'd love to get Professor Innes off to her rest, but we've got a little gift for her. So one more round of applause for her, please.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
All right. Well, we are powering on. Powering on right now to our 4th plenary of the day. Vitamin D, does it help our children? That's a big question. Dr. Cameron Grant is an Associate Professor and Head of the Department of Paediatrics, Child and Youth Health at the University of Auckland. He is also a paediatrician at Starship Starship Children's Hospital. He is the Associate Director of New Zealand's Contemporary Child Cohort Study, Growing Up in New Zealand. He has led the study's health domain since its inception in 2004. His research focuses on prevalent child health problems, which cause disparities between population subgroups in New Zealand and for which the potential exists to eliminate these disparities. His teaching skills have been recognised with faculty and university teaching awards, including a University of Auckland Teaching Excellence Award for sustained excellence in teaching. We are looking forward to his excellent teaching today. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Cameron.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and it's lovely to have the chance to follow on from Ines' wonderful presentation, and I also followed on from her as Head of Department of Paediatrics, and following on from her in that role has also been a real privilege. So at the end of this session, you may already be able to do that, you'll be able to recognise that vitamin D deficiency during pregnancy and infancy is a global problem, understand why vitamin D status is poorer in New Zealand than in many other developed countries, and demonstrate the potential for vitamin D status to be a determinant of respiratory health in early childhood. So let's start with the first of those. So as you all know, vitamin D deficiency causes rickets. What you may not realise is that rickets used to be a disease of the privileged. In the 18th and 19th century, before the Industrial Revolution, rickets was very common in the affluent, and that was to do with their style of clothing and the fact that they didn't spend any time outdoors. We then saw a shift, with rickets becoming a disease associated with poverty. This is a picture of the Garngard slum in Glasgow, Scotland, and in inner city populations like this around the developed world, around 50% of the children had rickets. And then it was discovered that you could cure rickets. You could cure it with sunlight, you could cure it with ultraviolet light, you could cure it with cod liver oil. And the effects of that were quite miraculous, as shown by this little child here. So a major public health problem in 1920 to 1925 became a rarity. One of the successes. But then people started to realise that rickets was becoming an issue again. They were seeing it in Indian and Pakistani families immigrating to England, amongst Muslim women in the Middle East and Central Asia, and in religious groups in inner city northeastern United States cities. It was then described in the 1990s, particularly amongst breastfed infants of African American women, despite the fact that they were living in the southern and hence the sunnier states. These children were exclusively breastfed. They spent little time outside. I lived in one of these cities for a couple of years, and the reasons why you didn't spend time outside are shown graphically in those pictures. It just was too dangerous. So we conducted a global study to define the global prevalence of vitamin D deficiency based upon the published literature, 90 or so articles from between 1959 to 2014, to see if we could get a global estimate of the prevalence of vitamin D deficiency in pregnant women and newborn infants as defined by a serum 25-hydroxy vitamin D concentration of less than 50 nanomoles per litre. And based upon these studies, what we found is that in North America, 64% of pregnant women, 30% of newborns are vitamin D deficient. In Europe, 57% of pregnant women, 73% of newborns. In the Eastern Mediterranean region, 46% of pregnant women, 60% of newborns. Southeast Asian region, 87% of pregnant women, 96% of newborns. And in the Western Pacific region where we live, 83% of pregnant women and 54% of newborns. So, a prevalent issue. So just to summarise, I wanted you to be able to recognise that vitamin D deficiency during pregnancy and infancy is a global problem. Lifestyle patterns that interfere with our ability to make vitamin D result in vitamin D deficiency. And I've shown you examples of that from the 18th century, 19th century, 20th and 21st century. And vitamin D deficiency is certainly a contemporary global public health issue. So moving now on to my second objective, understand why vitamin D status is poorer in New Zealand than in many other developed countries. 90% of our vitamin D comes from sunlight. New Zealand has wide seasonal variability in sunlight exposure. We're a long, skinny country. We span latitudes. We've got a 10-fold difference in sunlight exposure in Auckland by season, a 20-fold difference in Invercargill. Compared to other countries, we have bright sunlight, but it's very difficult to use this bright sunlight safely. We've got the highest rates of skin cancer in the world, and our health policy regarding sunlight is very much a sunlight avoidance policy. Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. What happens under clouds? It rains. So in Auckland, we have several months of the year where we only get a few hours of sunlight, and we have more rainy days per month than several other cities that we would consider to be poorer sources of vitamin D. Other sources of vitamin D? Oily fish, liver, eggs, cod liver oil, mushrooms and alfalfa, and mushrooms make their vitamin D from sunlight also. If you were living in the United States, you'd be able to obtain vitamin D from all of those food sources shown on the slide there. If you live in New Zealand, you're left with a diet that consists of margarine, fish, and infant formula milk. Now, vitamin D fortification policy varies widely around the world. Some countries, for example, Canada and the United States, have mandatory fortification of food, so you'll find it in your orange juice, milk, margarine, butter, everywhere. Fortification is encouraged in a number of countries, for example, Australia and Finland. And then for the rest of the world, fortification, there's no mandatory fortification, and it's just an option that can be done if people want to. This includes New Zealand. And if you look at vitamin D status by fortification policy, you see that in countries that have mandatory fortification, their populations generally have vitamin D status that is within the normal range. If you look at countries that have fortification that's only encouraged, that's generally not sufficient to enable a vitamin D intake to be adequate. And then if you have countries like New Zealand, you see a bit more variability, with New Zealand in particular having a very low vitamin D diet, but some of the other countries in this region, such as Japan and Norway, because they eat a lot of oily fish, having higher intake. So maybe they don't need it, but New Zealand certainly does. And as a result of this, of these several factors, we have a high prevalence of vitamin D deficiency in young New Zealand children. A cohort study that enrolled its infants from Wellington and Christchurch found that over half of them were vitamin D deficient, with around 20% having severe vitamin D deficiency. And a study in Auckland, an ethnically stratified sample of 6 to 23-month-old children, found that 45% of them were vitamin D deficient. And just to put it on an international perspective, this slide here shows the proportion of newborns in New Zealand and in the first 2 years of life who have a vitamin D level that puts them at risk of rickets. New Zealand shown in the red, United States shown in the blue. So roughly 4 times increased risk of a child getting rickets in New Zealand than in the United States. So it's quite simple, really. All you need to do is feed me more oily fish and liver sandwiches. And it's not just an issue of pregnant women and young infants. If you look across the age range, you see that roughly half of our population have a vitamin D concentration that's below what's thought to be normal. So, understand why vitamin D status is poorer in New Zealand than in many other developed countries. New Zealand lies entirely below the Tropic of Capricorn. We've got a sun avoidance health policy, which is really not a policy that's been developed to meet the needs of our ethnically diverse population. We've got large seasonal variation in sunlight exposure, very few foods that are fortified with vitamin D, and vitamin D supplementation that's not routinely recommended. So the third objective today is to help you to be able to demonstrate to your friends when you go home the potential for vitamin D status to be a determinant of respiratory health in early childhood, particularly in New Zealand. Now, there's a long history of observational studies that have shown relationships between vitamin D status and between rickets and respiratory infections. And I've just listed a number of them there. Pneumonia is more frequent in children than rickets in studies from the Middle East. In preschool age children, nutritional rickets is associated with an increased risk of pneumonia and of hospital admission with lower respiratory tract infection. Amongst hospitalised children with rickets, there's an increased risk of death amongst those who have pneumonia if they also have rickets. And subclinical vitamin D deficiency has been shown to increase the risk of acute lower respiratory tract infections. And it's believed that vitamin D has this effect because it is a modulator of the immune system. Vitamin D has effects on both the innate and adaptive immune response to maintain innate immune mechanisms necessary for defense against infections, but at the same time also promoting peripheral tolerance. So what is the clinical trial evidence that vitamin D prevents acute respiratory infections? Well, an individual patient-level meta-analysis of 25 clinical trials, including 2 from New Zealand, has recently been completed. Enrolled 11,321 participants aged 0 to 95 years. Number of clinical trials by global region is shown on this slide: 4 from Western Pacific, 3 from Southeast Asia, 5 from the Eastern Mediterranean region, 8 from Europe, and 5 from North America. And what these studies showed is a modest protective effect for everyone. An adjusted odds ratio of 0.86 with 95% confidence intervals of 0.79 to 0.95. A strong protective effect amongst those with a baseline 25-hydroxy vitamin D concentration less than 25 nanomoles per litre. And no protective effect at all if you give a large bolus dose as part of your intervention, with the theory being that very large bolus doses result in transient, very high serum concentrations, which really don't allow your body to use the vitamin D in an appropriate way and probably have adverse effects rather than beneficial effects on your immune system. So what about in the New Zealand context? As I said, there were 2 studies in this individual patient level meta-analysis that were conducted in New Zealand. One conducted in Christchurch and one conducted in Auckland. They make for an interesting comparison. The one conducted in Christchurch enrolled 322 healthy adults, 18 years or older, who were staff or students of Canterbury District Health Board. The one in Auckland enrolled 260 healthy pregnant women attending a maternity care clinic in Manukau City, and then their infants. The Christchurch study, 95% of the participants were European. The Auckland study enrolled its cohort from Manukau City because it wanted to get an ethnically diverse cohort, and it managed to achieve that with over a third of the participants Pacific, 18% Māori, 19% Asian, and 26% European. The study in Christchurch used bolus doses, 200,000 international units at the beginning, and then monthly doses of 100,000 international units for 18 months. The Auckland study had two different dosing regimes, and I'll show those to you on the next slide. So in this randomised clinical trial, pregnant women from enrolment at 27 weeks gestation to birth, and then their infants from birth to age 6 months were randomly and equally assigned to one of three groups: placebo mum and then placebo infant, mum 1,000 international units per day, and then the baby from birth to age 6 months 400 international units per day. The pregnant woman from 27 weeks gestation to term 2,000 international units per day, and then the baby 800 international units per day from birth to age 6 months. This slide here shows the results from the Christchurch study. Median number of self-reported upper respiratory tract infection episodes per person. No significant difference. This slide here shows the results from the Auckland study. Percentage of children making primary care visits for respiratory infections up to age 18 months determined by an audit of primary care records. And what we saw is that a significantly smaller proportion of children in the higher dose group, but not the lower dose group compared to placebo, had a primary care visit for an acute respiratory infection. So for whom in New Zealand is vitamin D supplementation most likely to be an effective preventive strategy? Clearly, it's going to be for those who are vitamin D deficient, and in the New Zealand context, that's primarily Pacific children. 25% of Pacific children under 2 years of age got a vitamin D level low enough to put them at risk of rickets. Also Māori children, also other non-European children. And it's interesting just to show those two graphs side by side, the prevalence of vitamin D deficiency shown in the blue, the hospital admission rate for pneumonia shown in the red. And what about asthma? Again, in the same trial, with the three arms, placebo pregnant woman, placebo infant, lower dose vitamin D, pregnant woman, lower dose vitamin D, infant, higher dose vitamin D, pregnant woman, higher dose vitamin D, infant. We also looked at some asthma-related outcomes. We measured aero-allergen sensitization when the children were 18 months of age, with skin prick testing to house dust, mite, cat, and pollen. We measured specific serum IgE using the immunocap assay to antigens from these classes shown here: animal, polcalcin, grass, tree and weed pollens, mold, mites, and cockroach. And this was a semi-quantitative assay, so we could look to see whether people had higher or lower serum concentrations of these antibodies. This slide here shows the skin prick test results for the three study groups, and as you can see, there's a difference between the study groups in the proportion of infants who are skin prick test positive to house dust mite, but not to cat or grass pollen. And if we look more closely in that house dust mite response, we see that the proportion of infants who responded to house dust mite was significantly greater in the placebo group compared to the higher dose vitamin D group, but no difference in comparison with the lower dose vitamin D group. Then moving on to the serum antibody measurements, this slide here shows those antibody measurements to house dust mite. There were 6 different house dust mite antigens that we measured responses to, and you can see that for 4 of those 6, there's quite a difference between the 3 study groups. So the IgE responses vary between study groups to these 4 house dust mite antigens: DERF1, DERF2, DERP1, and DERP2. And the differences in this occasion were seen both in comparison between the lower dose and the placebo group, and the higher dose and the placebo group, with the differences being more marked for the higher dose than the lower dose. We also visited all the primary care practices of these children and gathered their electronic primary care records and read them all and coded them as acute visits and well-child visits and other visits. And we coded the acute visits and looked carefully within those for which there was a respiratory reason for the presentation, and categorized these visits as being due to cold or influenza, otitis media, upper respiratory infection, croup, bronchitis, asthma, bronchiolitis, wheezy lower respiratory tract infection, and fever and cough. And we double entered this data because it was text data that we had to read and abstract, and wanted to be careful we got it right. And this slide here shows the number of children with an acute primary care respiratory illness visit up to age 18 months by doctor diagnosis. And what you see is the only difference we found between the 3 study groups was in the proportion of infants making a primary care visit at which the doctor assigned a diagnosis of asthma. Now, we all know that it's very hard to make that diagnosis at 18 months, so you do have to take this information with a grain of salt, but it does follow on quite nicely from what Ines was saying earlier. And what we saw is that there was a significant difference between the 3 study groups, with a smaller proportion of the children in the lower dose or the higher dose group compared to the placebo group having any primary care visit at which a diagnosis of asthma was made. And what about vitamin D and asthma exacerbations? Not quite as much literature on this as there is on acute respiratory infections, but there has been a systematic review and meta-analysis of 5 randomized trials in primary school age children from Denmark, Japan, Poland, the United States, and India, using a range of daily doses. And this has shown that this does result in a reduction in asthma exacerbations. So, the third objective was for you to be able to demonstrate the potential for vitamin D status to be a determinant of respiratory health in early childhood. So, vitamin D supplementation prevents acute respiratory infections in those who are vitamin D deficient. In an ethnically diverse sample of New Zealand pregnant women, vitamin D supplementation during pregnancy and infancy reduces the proportion of children making primary care visits for acute respiratory infections up to age 18 months, the proportion of children with house dust mite sensitization and the intensity of sensitization, and the proportion of children making acute primary care visits described by the doctor as being for asthma. In children with asthma, vitamin D supplementation prevents asthma exacerbations. So, just to go over things again, that's not my bicycle, by the way. I wanted you to be able to recognise that vitamin D deficiency during pregnancy and infancy is a global problem, understand why vitamin D status is poorer in New Zealand than in many other developed countries, and demonstrate the potential for vitamin D status to be a determinant of respiratory health in early childhood. So as I've shown, lifestyle patterns that interfere with our ability to make vitamin D result in vitamin D deficiency, and I've shown examples of how history repeats itself again and again and again, and because of that, vitamin D deficiency is a contemporary global public health issue. We have poorer vitamin D status in New Zealand because of where we are on the globe, because we've got a sun avoidance health policy, large variation in sunlight, and we neither fortify or supplement in any way that could be considered robust. And the potential for vitamin D status to be a determinant of respiratory health has been demonstrated. Vitamin D supplementation prevents acute respiratory infections in those who are vitamin D deficient. In an ethnically diverse sample in New Zealand, vitamin D supplementation during pregnancy and infancy reduces the proportion of children making primary care acute respiratory infections in early childhood, the proportion of children with house dust mite sensitization and the intensity of that sensitization, and the proportion of children making acute primary care visits which their doctor thought were because of asthma. And in children with asthma, vitamin D supplementation prevents asthma exacerbations. So, vitamin D, does it help our children? Well, vitamin D is a simple and cheap intervention which prevents acute respiratory infections and possibly also asthma. Because vitamin D deficiency is more prevalent in Pacific and Māori children, vitamin D supplementation is more likely to result in improvements in their health. Thus, vitamin D supplementation is, I believe, uniquely positioned to enable current ethnic disparities in respiratory health to be decreased. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cameron Grant, and on behalf of our conference, we'd love to give you a little gift as a thanks for your time, and straight after this, we'd love to do a question and answer. So if you've got any questions, how about we write those down and get ready for that. But one more thanks for Dr. Cameron.
Oh, that's very nice. Oh, good. Oh, thank you very much. This is very nice of you to give me a present.
In order to have our question and answer, I need to get our chair back. So if we could have the fantastic... Oh, it's you this time. Oh, you've stood for it. All right, Dr. David Martino. Give it up for him.
Can everyone hear me okay? Yes? Okay, great. Dr. Cameron Grant, thank you for your talk. It's nice to be joining you here on the comfortable couch.
Yeah.
I think we probably have about 15 minutes, which is particularly unfair on just one speaker, but it was incredibly brave of Professor Asher to come down and give her presentation today. So we're going to need a lot of questions. So I encourage you to think not just about vitamin D, but also about someone who was the Dean of Pediatrics there, I think you mentioned. So can I open up to the audience for any questions? Yes, at the back.
Good morning, I'm Christine Broekham. I'm GP in Wakanai. Concretely, practically, what should we do with children? Which, so those of vitamin D, should we give them? And until which age?
So the question is, what should we do for children? The dose of vitamin D we should give, and up to what age? So the dosing recommendations currently by the Ministry of Health are 400 international units per day. I don't think we can say that there is a single dose that applies to all children. Some children need more, and some children need less. Our study implies that 400 international units per day is insufficient, particularly for Māori and Pacific children, and that they need, twice that dose. We have just started another clinical trial, which is looking to see if we can prevent recurrent hospital admissions amongst children in Auckland. And in that trial, we're giving the children 5,000 international units per week. So roughly 800 international units per day, and we think that's about the right dose. And this is for children who are hospitalised under age 2, and they'll continue it until they're 3.
Here we have a question down the front.
Hi, Terry from Tauranga from Bay of Plenty Asthma Centre. Just like to ask from an educator's point of view, when you've got these young children that are 18 months and having a lot of these chest infections, how could we ask the GP to consider that? And it's believed, would those, because of the cost, I'm just asking, I know children under 6 get this free care. It was just mentioned to me by a colleague that cost of the blood tests is $45. would the HDA, the Health Disability Allowance, not cover that cost for the children under that age?
So the question is about the expense of measuring vitamin D status. So the cost of a vitamin D blood test is much higher than it needs to be. It's based upon what the health insurance companies in Australia will reimburse the laboratories for, which is what defines its cost. It does not cost $45 to measure someone's 25-hydroxy vitamin D concentration. But unfortunately, that's the market rate. And because of that, the Ministry of Health actually makes it very, very difficult for anyone to measure vitamin D status. I personally believe a better approach would be to supplement all pregnant women and young children in New Zealand during the winter and spring half of the year, and just don't do blood tests.
Dr. Anastasia said, and this is what we're here for, we're for equity, and these are the ones, the Pacific Island and other ethnicities, really the income and that. So it's just, it's unfortunate. Maybe we could, as a foundation or something, do, I don't know what we could do, but some lobbying or something about that. Yeah. Or to the government.
Yeah. So how do we change policy? It's a very challenging area, and I'm sure you'll remember the examples of when we tried to have folate added to flour and the resistance that caused. I believe we would face similar challenges with vitamin D if we tried to have it introduced as a supplement, a free supplement for all pregnant women and infants, which is where I think we need to get to. So what we're trying to do as an intermediate step is this new hospital-based clinical trial, because if we show that vitamin D supplementation reduces recurrent admissions, we can then rewrite our Starship clinical guidelines and say on discharge from hospital, prescribe vitamin D. And then once that happens in that setting, it's much easier to then move it out into the whole population. We've used exactly this approach, for example, to get the conjugate pneumococcal vaccine onto our immunisation schedule. So we're going to try a similar approach here. But I share your frustration. Our policy development remains very, very Eurocentric, and I get increasingly frustrated by that, as I'm sure many of you in the room do too.
And do we have another question at the front?
Thank you, Cameron. That was a fantastic talk. I really enjoyed it. There's a couple of related questions which we sort of touched on. The first is that vitamin D blood tests have got a reliability problem, and often, certainly in our hospital, they recommend, if you think about it, just supplement rather than test, because the vitamin D blood test is A, expensive, and B, not that reliable. The second question is sort of a bit relates to what we've been talking about. I guess we've got three choices of increasing vitamin D. One is supplementation to widespread use of supplements. Two is fortification of food. And three is persuading people, particularly kids, to go outside more. Which would you prefer?
I'd prefer two of those three. I'd prefer that our food was fortified, because then you don't have to think about it. And I prefer children spent more time outside. But I appreciate that in the current context, that's just not a practical option, particularly for those children who most need to be outside, because their families don't have the access to land that enables their children to safely play outside.
Could we invent a solar-powered Xbox that only works if you use it outside?
Yeah. Yeah, I like the idea of that, yeah. That's right.
Can I just follow on with a question there about fortification? You mentioned that the countries in which fortification had been implemented, they were successful in reducing rates of vitamin D insufficiency. Is there any evidence over time that reduced asthma rates in those populations?
I don't know that we've got the data to show whether it's reduced asthma rates, but certainly those are countries that have lower asthma rates than New Zealand. And I think New Zealand probably was always destined to have a high asthma rates. I suspect that the migration to New Zealand was partly driven by health issues. Those slums, that picture I showed you of Glasgow, imagine if you were prone to respiratory infections and you had an option of hopping on a boat and sailing to the other side of the world, that maybe you would do that, whereas if your neighbour who didn't get respiratory infections didn't, you wouldn't. So I suspect we may have started with a group who are already predisposed to asthma, and they find themselves in an environment where they're missing out on something that could reduce the prevalence. Absolutely.
Do you think, because I think you've raised the important point about dose and having the right dose, is the dose they're introducing in the food supply sufficient to actually reduce outcomes or improve health outcomes?
Certainly, if you have mandatory fortification and you're eating a fairly regular diet, then you're going to meet your daily requirements. Yep.
Great. Z.
Thanks, very interesting talk. With vitamin D, I mean, you sort of showed that, yes, it's protective, or it appears to be protective against respiratory infections, atopy, and exacerbation. One of the things that you didn't talk about is a couple of recent studies published in 2016 looking at vitamin D supplementation prenatally and the effect on new onset asthma. And the results, from memory, weren't that positive. I mean, I think it showed a very small decrease in risk, but it wasn't statistically significant. So I'm just sort of wondering whether you could perhaps discuss new onset asthma.
Sure. So I think you're referring to the one study from the United States, and I think the other was from Scandinavia.
The other one was a Danish study.
Yeah, neither of them are placebo-controlled because they're performed in countries that have vitamin D fortification supplementation. It's a waste of time doing studies in countries that where you can't have a placebo group. So again, New Zealand is currently uniquely positioned to be able to do this research.
You showed in there as well quite a specific effect on sensitization to house dust mite, but not other allergens. And then also, the others, also a reduction in presentation for asthma, but not other outcomes. Any idea why the effect is specific to that antigen?
I think it might be to do with the age at which we assessed sensitization, given that house dust mite tends to be one you become sensitized to a little bit earlier than some of the others. And if we were able to repeat those skin prick tests and IgE assays when the children were older, we may have found a different pattern.
Okay. Do we have any other questions for the audience at the moment? We've got 4 more minutes, so I'll keep going. The ethnicity question is really interesting to me. We've found an association between low serum vitamin D and food allergy outcomes in our population-based cohort. One of the other findings that we found was that some people tolerate low vitamin D better than others because they have a genetic SNP at the vitamin D binding protein, which means that they have more they're able to utilise less bioavailable vitamin D. And these SNPs probably differ in different ethnicities. How important do you think it is that we sort of understand these population differences in terms of who's going to benefit the most, or who are going to have the best benefit to vitamin D sufficiency?
Yeah, I think it's very important because there is also literature showing that if your vitamin D levels are too high, you're at increased risk of developing some atopic diseases also. So I think it is really, really important that we have a better understanding of it. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. There's a question over here. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Iman from GP in Auckland. Is there any relation between vitamin D supplementation and with the heart disease, especially for adult? Yeah, is there any?
So you're probably aware there's been a very big clinical trial of that in Auckland, which I think the results are being released next week. Robert Scragg is the principal investigator on a large project where they've been looking at some of those cardiovascular disease outcomes. So I don't know the answer though, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have a feeling on whether supplementation prenatally is more important than postnatally, or is that the million-dollar question still?
Well, I think if you're wanting to influence the development of the immune system, you need to start supplementation before birth. In our clinical trial, we started at the beginning of the 3rd trimester, and I still wonder whether that was a bit late, whether it might have been better to start early. You know, the immune system does start developing earlier than that. So, yeah, I suspect it is. If you just wait until the child's born, I doubt you'll have the same effect. But also, you have the situation then of the child being born vitamin D deficient, so you're already on the back foot.
Okay, I think we've pretty much made our time now. If there aren't any further questions, please join me in thanking Dr. Cameron for a fantastic talk.
It's time for something fun. Who's in for something fun right now? Everyone with a hand up may win a prize. Anyone else want to change their mind about that? All right. Well, I have a very lovely angel approaching the stage because we are about to embark on our first incredible version of something we call Breathless TV.
Welcome to Breathless TV, the show that brings you all the coverage from the 2016 New Zealand Respiratory Conference. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, I see lots of lovely faces from last year and some new faces as well. Not only that, but you'll see that we've been given funding again for a second year of Breathless TV. We have a new set. We have a new location. We're in Auckland as opposed to Wellington. And of course, I have a new co-host. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Erin. It's great to be here today with you. You are the star of Breathless TV, and I feel so privileged to be sharing the couch with you.
Oh, no, it's lovely to have you here. In fact, how have you been finding it so far? What have been the highlights?
Oh, highlights are really easy. I really loved listening to Isaac Luke talk about his journey with asthma, and also just to know that he'd stepped off the plane to be here with us today was so incredible. And also Professor Innes's research and her dedication to being with us today was really lovely as well.
That's awesome. And of course, we've got a lot of sponsors as well downstairs who no doubt you met at morning tea, and we're going to bring a couple of them up right now. So who should we have first? It's John from Rex Medical Anywhere Close. Would you like to come on up?
Where is he? He's here, possibly.
While we're waiting for John to come up, let's talk about some prizes.
We've got someone. Oh, yes, so we've got some prizes. So we'll talk about the prizes. That's a good idea. Because we've got
Julie,
things.
would you like to come on up? We'll do Julie first, and she's from Novartis. Now, I have these prizes here. $25 vouchers from New World and $20 vouchers from Countdown. We've got a couple of them to give away, and we thought maybe you said something before in your opening speech.
Yes, that's right. So I'm looking for anyone right now who can raise their hand like they've never raised it before and tell me instantaneously the hashtag for our conference for these next 2 days. Yes, you, ma'am, right down the back. Your hand was up first. Yell it out nice and proud. Give her a big round of applause, everybody.
Would you like Countdown or New World?
Countdown or New World? Either one.
Or.
All right, well, I'm going to go down there. So while we get our first guest up, I will do that. And also, I think for the next giveaway, I'm going for it. But Erin, while I'm travelling through the audience as a live reporter, I think that's what
Julie,
I do.
would you like to come on up and let's chat? So Julie represents Novartis, and of course you're back again this year. I tried to make it feel homely and bring some chocolates to the table. Oh, you're just as awesome. Brought a flake. Now, Julie, you're here again this year. What's different though? What have you got that's new this year?
Oh, well, hi Erin. Firstly, thanks for having us back. Everyone, so this year new from Novartis is Ultibro. Ultibro is a dual bronchodilator. Last year, when I met you all, we had Seabri and Ombres and we're launching them. This year we've got Ultibro, which is Seabri and Ombres in one device. So that's what we've got.
That's real cool, bro.
Thanks, bro. You on Ultibro, bro?
And And what are you hoping that people will take away from them?
Well, what we're hoping is that people will actually just come and have a chat to us at the Novata stand and just learn a little bit about the clinical information with Ultibro. And we'd love it if you do that, and we'd love to see you, and we have chocolate.
You're so lovely, Julie. Oh, thank you.
I only bought one though.
We can share. Thank you so much. Now, while we're waiting for our next guest to come up, we have, of course, more of these vouchers to give away. So I was thinking...
Why don't we could do a social media giveaway, I reckon.
it.
So we can use that hashtag. So my wonderful friend over there who just won that prize insisted on a selfie. But I reckon after the next person we speak to, I'm going to choose someone from Twitter who's used the hashtag NZRC to win a prize. So if you want to get in there, just hashtag a photo of Erin and I because we're beautiful, or one of your highlights, just put it in there. You've got a bit of time, and we can give you a little bit of a voucher if I just choose you randomly. I did see someone today who posted a picture of me, so thank you for that, whoever you were.
Do we have John yet? Dave.
Oh, someone's pointing. Oh, there he is.
Oh, over there. John, come on up. Now, John is from Rex Medical, which is 100% New Zealand owned, committed to enhancing the health and well-being of our communities. You may not want a chocolate, but you're more than welcome to take one. What do you stand for, John, as Rex Medical?
We stand as a New Zealand company. We're very proud to be New Zealanders. We're very proud to be involved today, and we want to be New Zealanders helping New Zealanders. Thank you.
Oh, you're wonderful. Thank you so much. And is there any thing else you want to promote while you're here, while you've got a moment on television?
We have a total of 9 inhalers, and we also have a new product for cystic fibrosis as well. So please come to our stand. We'd love to give you chocolates. We can give you a pen that we've managed to even make it the same colour as Chris Lab Sam. So. And we also can give you something for the back of a cell phone. But more importantly, we've got some patient brochures, posters, and we've got some multilingual brochures as well. So please come along. We'd love to share those with you.
Thank you so much for being at the conference this year, John. Alrighty, so have we had any hashtagging?
Yes, we have. We've had a hashtag thing happening. So
do we have a winner?
We have a winner, and the winner right now, at this very point in time, as I just double check who that winner is the Asthma and Respiratory Conference. No, it's not. It's we have got Tanya Scott. Where are you? That's you. No, you're the photographer. All right,
she does
that's
our
okay.
social media.
Yes.
Would you
well, maybe I'll give it a bit more time. So we'll just, if you've got a bit more time to go, hashtag NZRC. Do it now, and you might win a prize.
While we're waiting, we could talk to Dave from HRV. Dave, come on up, Dave. Well, now while Dave's coming up, I'm just going to mention Isaac Luke before on his social media.
Yes.
When he talks about posting, he's not talking that down. He has got 27,000 followers on Twitter and over 150,000 followers on Instagram. So he's a big deal, guys. It's quite awesome.
Amazing.
And so is Dave. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here, Erin.
Now, HRV, what is it? What do you do, Dave?
HRV is a great privately owned New Zealand company. We have 550 staff, the length and breadth of the country. Right now, we probably have 70 people in New Zealand homes. And through that journey, we find a lot of need. Need can be poor housing, over-occupancy, cold, damp, mould, and all of the things that go with that. And a big part of our brief is education, but also solutions. So obviously through the core HRV ventilation system with its state-of-the-art filtration, but also water filtration, energy-efficient heating and cooling, and double glazing, we can provide solutions.
And so you're hoping to get out in the next couple of days just to inform people of all those products and that information?
Obviously. Look, if you don't have an HRV, come and talk to us. If you have an HRV, come and talk to us. If you just want to find out a little bit about it, come and have a chat. We're down there and we'd love to talk to you. And look, just this morning has been great. What we've learnt, there's 3 of us here the whole weekend, what we've learnt has been awe-inspiring, really. Our journey is about education, and we're just like 3 people. It's osmosis for us. We're just going to pick stuff up and learn, and it's a great thing for us.
Oh, you're wonderful.
Thank you for having us here.
Thank you, Dave. Cheers. Okay, the time has come. Do we have a hashtagger?
We do have a hashtagger. This was from a little while ago, but I want to give a voucher to Chris Davidson. Where are you, Chris? Hey! Over there. All right, I'll come and see you soon. I'll come and see you. I'm not allowed to leave.
Now, we have plenty of other vouchers coming your way, and you're lucky because we've got more episodes of Breathless TV coming your way as well. So we will figure out how to award these as well. Right now, we're going to stop there. We're getting the wind up because it's lunchtime.